So tonight we start Daniel chapter 7. And this chapter is essentially a repeat of Daniel 2, the one that was given to Nebuchadnezzar and explained by Daniel. However, it gives other details, and it looks at it from a different angle as well. In Daniel 2, it's looking at these different kingdoms from their moral value, and each one decreased in moral value and in riches as well. But as we come to this chapter, it looks primarily at the fourth beast, but it mentions the others so that we can see the same train of development. Sorry about this picture. I didn't really want to get this one, but I hit it and I couldn't get rid of it. This was where I stayed in the Philippines when I gave a series of lectures there. So we start with Daniel chapter 7, verses 1 and 2. It says, "In the first year of Belshazzar, king of Babylon, Daniel had a dream, and visions of his head upon his bed. Then he wrote the dream and told the sum of the matters." So we're backing up from the previous chapters. Daniel in the lion's den takes place during Medo-Persia, which Babylon's already gone. And chapter 5, we talked about the writing on the wall, and this goes before both of those. In the first year of Belshazzar. And verse 2, Daniel spake and said, "I saw in my vision by night, and behold, the four winds of the heaven strove upon the great sea." So he calls this a vision. Generally, visions are during the day, and dreams are at night, but this is called a vision, and it was at night. And he has shown a symbol that we need to pay attention to. He talks about wind. And in Jeremiah 25, verse 32, says, "Thus saith the Lord of hosts, Behold, evil shall go forth from nation to nation." What kind of evil? "And a great whirlwind shall be raised up from the coast of the earth." Well, it's not too hard to figure out that's talking about war. And so wind in the Bible, in the prophetic aspect anyway, wind represents conquering by war. And we already saw that Medo-Persia conquered Babylon by war, and of course Greece conquered Medo-Persia and so on. So it's easy to see that that is the issue. Now the other symbol here is sea. And in Revelation 17:15 it says, "And he saith unto me, The waters which thou sawest are peoples, and multitudes, and nations, and tongues." So when we're reading about prophecy and we read about water, sea is a lot of water. And so when we read that, it's talking about a lot of people, huge numbers of people. And therefore, the warfare in those days took place generally around the Middle East, because that's where the population was concentrated. And so we have war that is between nations, and he is telling us how these nations are going to take over. Because I didn't put something in here about this, but a beast is usually ferocious. In other words, they eat by killing other animals. And so people get like animals when they want to war, when they want to fight with each other. They're like animals. So it's portrayed here as animals. Verses 3 and 4. And 4 great beasts came up from the sea. So in other words, they arose in a populated area. They came up from the sea, diverse one from another. So each was very different. The first was like a lion and had eagle's wings. I beheld till the wings thereof were plucked, and it was lifted up from the earth, and made stand upon the feet as a man, and a man's heart was given to it. So this lion lost his beastly characteristics and became like a man is supposed to be. Well, there's no doubt a reference here to Nebuchadnezzar's conversion. And we're told in Habakkuk who it was, Habakkuk 1, verse 6 and then 8, says, I raise up the Chaldeans, that bitter and hasty nation, which shall march through the breadth of the land to possess the dwelling places that are not theirs. They shall fly as the eagle that casteth, or that's not, there's an autocorrect here that messes me up. That cause it to eat, I guess. Yeah, probably. So here is described the Babylonian kingdom, how they would be as they conquered the world, and it also mentions the fact that they go like an eagle. So it's not hard to figure out that the lion represents Babylon. They had lions everywhere in their kingdom, and people, even historians that look back, can see why they are pictured as a lion. But the Bible pictures them here having eagle wings because they were rapid in their conquest. And I believe the key to the man's heart is found in Ezekiel 36:26. This is the Bible verse on conversion, what happens when somebody lets Jesus take charge of their life. A new heart also will he give you. Before we're converted, we have the heart of a beast. And we're mean and nasty to people, generally speaking, unless we were trained, in our childhood to be nice. And even then, we can be very unkind to people because we don't have God living in our life. But God promises a new heart also will he give you. I will take away the stony heart. So these verses are presenting the start of Babylon, the change that took place in Babylon through Daniel's witness to King Nebuchadnezzar, and God's driving him out, insane for 7 years. All those events led to his conversion. Now, verse 5. And behold, another beast, a second like to a bear, and it raised up itself on one side, and it had 3 ribs in the mouth of it, between the teeth of it, and they said thus unto it, Arise, devour much flesh. So again, you know, the beastly qualities of the Medes and Persians. But this time we have some clues that help us to understand who it is. And in Isaiah 13, verses 17 to 19, it says, "Behold, I will stir up the Medes against them, which shall not regard silver, and as for gold, they shall not delight in it. Their bows also shall dash the young men to pieces, and they shall have no pity on the fruit of the womb. Their eyes shall not spare children. And Babylon, the glory of kingdoms, the beauty of the Chaldees' excellency, shall be as when God overthrew Sodom and Gomorrah." So here's a description of how the Medes and Persians would act as they came to conquer the Chaldeans. That's the same as Babylonians. And so that prophecy was fulfilled. Now it mentions one clue too, that it would be raised on one side. And it says in the next chapter, which we'll study next week, but it gives another clue there. It says, "There stood before the river a ram which had 2 horns." And we'll find out that the ram with 2 horns is the same power in chapter 8 as the bear in chapter 7. And the 2 horns are high, but one was higher than the other, and the higher came up last. Now it's interesting that although the Medes and Persians were working together to conquer the Babylonians, it wasn't long until the Medes don't seem to be having much leadership, and it's the Persians that take over the leadership. And that's where we get some of the other stories of the book of Daniel. Another clue in chapter 7 is that it had 3 ribs in the mouth of it. Well, this is an oversimplification, but it covers the majority of what they conquered. They conquered Lydia, Babylon, and Egypt. And so it's represented in this prophecy as 3 ribs that they take and conquer. Next beast is in verse 6. "After this I beheld, and lo, another, like a leopard, which had upon the back of it 4 wings of a fowl. The beast had also 4 heads, and dominion was given to it." So we know from Daniel 2 that was Greece, and yet these details help us to know for sure that it's Greece. Now this one, instead of having 2 wings, had 4 wings. And probably you've heard of Alexander the Great, who conquered the world by the age of 30 years old. He really went fast. And so the 4 wings represent the rapid conquest that Alexander made. However, he didn't stay the leader of the kingdom all that long. And so the kingdom actually got divided up among his 4 generals. And here's why it talks about 4 heads. The first one is Egypt. And it was Ptolemy, one of the generals, that took charge of Egypt. Then Macedonia was taken charge of by Cassander. Thrace and Asia, not all of Asia, but a minor, but some of it, was taken over by Lysimachus. And then the fourth one was the other part of Asia Minor and Mesopotamia. And so the kingdom was divided into 4 pieces. As time goes on, it was reduced to 2 that battled each other, but that's in another chapter. And we come to the 4th beast. And this is really the focus of the chapter, and to some extent the focus of the rest of the book. But it's an important beast. After this, I saw in the night visions, and behold, a 4th beast, dreadful and terrible and strong exceedingly. And it had great iron teeth. Notice the tie-in with Daniel 2. The legs were of iron. And this beast is also the 4th kingdom, and it has iron teeth. It devoured and brake in pieces and stamped the residue with the feet of it, and it was diverse from all the beasts that were before it, and it had 10 horns. In Daniel 2, we had 10 toes. Although that's not the emphasis of Daniel 2 about having 10. But it did sort of work out that way, to have 10. The focus in that chapter is that they would be broken up. There would not be a world empire. Only 4 world empires as far as political kingdoms. And in this chapter, it's adding some details about this 4th power. So the iron teeth would represent Rome. Now I'll just give you a clue, which we will see as we go along. But this beast represents 2 powers with their capital in Rome. And so the first one was pagan Rome, and the tie-in is clear with the iron representing pagan Rome. Another interesting statement here is, let's see, might have made a mistake here. Let's go on to verse 8. Okay. It devoured and brake in pieces, but then it says it was diverse or different from all the other beasts. Now, Rome was not really that much different from the others, so this has to refer to the second power with its capital in Rome. And it actually succeeded the pagan Roman Empire, which is the Roman Catholic Church. And interestingly enough, they both ruled from the same place. Now, not sure why I've got the nails of brass. That's got to be in here somewhere. Anyway, in Daniel 6:12, it talks about the law of the Medes and Persians, which altereth not. And so the Roman Catholic Church claims infallibility, which means we don't have to change any of our laws. Once we pass that law, it's forever because it's right. It can't be wrong. And that was the same quality that existed in the Persian Empire, Medes and Persians. You remember the story about Daniel being thrown in the lion's den was because they couldn't change the law. And if you read the book of Esther, the reason they had to tell the Jews they would have to fight for themselves is because they couldn't change the law. Both of those were from, the Medes or the Persians, basically. And that comes in under verse 19. If you just look down, it calls about nails of brass. That's where it's talking about the papacy a little more. We'll come to that. Also, the 10 horns, there was 10 divisions of the pagan Roman Empire. And there were 10 tribes that ultimately developed into Europe. And those 10 tribes are represented here in this beast, which is representing two main powers. And therefore, it is including the fact of some changes that are going to happen because of the rise of the Roman Catholic Church. Verse 8, I considered the horns, and behold, there came up among them another little horn, before whom there were 3 of the first horns plucked up by the roots. And behold, in this horn were eyes, like the eyes of a man, and a mouth speaking great things. So here, of course, there's a man in charge of all these kingdoms, but there is a reason why it mentions this little horn that came up and destroyed 3. And as we look, we'll see more and more evidence that the little horn represents the leader of the papacy or the leader of the Roman Catholic Church. Now, one of the clues that shows who it is in uprooting 3 of these horns. And so the 3 that the Roman Catholic Church conquered in order to rise into power were the Heruli, the Vandals, and the Ostrogoths. We don't hear much of anything about these tribes. Others kind of turned into the European nations, the rest of them, but these were uprooted and conquered as the Roman Church rose to power. Then we see a big clue. This man was speaking great things. Now, if you just turn down to verse 25, it talks about what this man was going to do. And he shall speak great words against the Most High. So he was actually going to speak against God. He was going, Revelation says he was going to blaspheme God. And so he's going to do that. And shall wear out the saints of the Most High. Now that's a very interesting phrase. It's one thing to kill somebody, but it's another thing to wear them out. So it's talking about torture. And I don't know whether you've ever seen any of the torture instruments that were used by this power back in the Dark Ages, but they are enough to turn your stomach as you think about what those poor people went through to have to be tortured that way. And they specialized in torturing people without killing them, so that they could torture them as long as possible. And the people, there's no better phrase than this one to describe it. He's going to wear them out. They would say, please, Lord, let me die. I can't handle this. It's too much to go through. They wear them out. And another key, and think to change times and laws. Well, the primary law of the Bible is the Ten Commandments. And so it's pointing out that this power would seek to change the commandment that has to do with time. And there's only one commandment that has to do with time. And that's the fourth commandment, the Sabbath commandment. And sure enough, later I can give you some quotations. The Catholic Church proudly admits we changed the day of worship from Saturday to Sunday. And so nobody has to wonder who it is that did it. They're bold to say so themselves. Then it ends, verse 25 ends by saying, and they shall be given into his hand until a time and times and the dividing of time. Now again, we'll look at that prophecy, but it is a time prophecy about their period of rule to be able to do what we just read that they would be able to do. And it goes from 538 AD to 1798, 1260 years. This is the period that the Catholic Church was doing those things. Okay, going back to verse 9. Now, when, of course, Daniel didn't understand all these things, you'll see at the end of the chapter, he was really concerned about these things, but he didn't understand. However, through a study of the Bible, we've been able to discover what this is talking about. And so this is such a scary thing and so horrible that before God goes in any deeper, he talks about what's going to happen to this power and what's going to happen to the people that are faithful to God. And so in verse 9 it changes. It says, I beheld till the thrones were cast down, and the Ancient of Days did sit, whose garment was white as snow, and the hair of his head like the pure wool. His throne was like the fiery flame, and his wheels as burning fire. It's not too hard to believe that the Ancient of Days is the Father. And so we see a picture here of thrones being placed. And we see the Father sitting on the throne. Now, this is describing in human terms, and it's not necessarily literal that God looks exactly like this. Because I doubt that he looks old like we do, when we get gray hair and white hair. But the image to be presented here is that he's very wise and very old, and he has lots of experience. And so this is now going to go forward in verse 10. A fiery stream issued and came forth from before him. Thousands ministered unto him, and 10,000 times 10,000 stood before him. So here we see the angels spoken about, that all the angels are involved in like a giant jury. They're going to listen to this, and you notice what they're going to listen to. The judgment was set and the books were opened. The Bible speaks clearly, and we'll study more about this later. But the Bible is clear. God has books. They may not be books like we think of, but again, human language. I think it's more like a videotape, that he has the ability to replay everything anybody does, during their whole life. He's got it on record. But in the days the Bible was written, they put everything in books, so that was given here to help us understand that he has a record. And there's a judgment that's going to take place, and those books will be open, and the Father will be in charge, and the angels will be all gathered around. Now we'll hear about Jesus in a minute, but before we learn about Jesus, it tells what's going to happen to this beast. Verse 11. I beheld then, because of the voice of the great words which the horn spake, I beheld, even till the beast was slain. Now this is very important for God's faithful people. Even though the beast, this terrible beast, is allowed to do a lot of terrible things, God wants his people to know it will not be forever. When this judgment is finished, he's going to be killed for what he has done. I beheld then, because of the voice of the great words which the horn spake. Remember that those great words were blasphemy against God? Those great words were, we have the power to change the law of God. Those are pretty big words. I beheld, even till the beast was slain, and his body destroyed and given to the burning flame. As concerning the rest of the beasts, they had their dominion taken away, yet their lives were prolonged for a season and a time. Now this is a very interesting verse. In Revelation 13:2, we have this verse, and the beast which I saw was like unto a leopard, and his feet were as the feet of a bear. Now, by the way, this is talking about the same beast that we're looking at in this chapter. And his mouth as the mouth of a lion, and the dragon gave him his power and his seat and great authority. Now, if we put this verse with verse 12 here, what it's telling us is that when Babylon was conquered, they disappeared. When Medo-Persia was conquered, they disappeared. When Greece was conquered, they disappeared. But certain characteristics of those nations carried on into the fourth beast. And so, as we look at the idea here, it says, their lives were prolonged for a season and a time. It means through this fourth beast, especially the papal one, it's like Babylon was still having an impact on the world through them. And also, as it says here, the leopard and the bear. And maybe we can talk more about what those things are later on. But it's interesting to notice that the Roman Catholic Church has characteristics, and I pointed out one already, has characteristics that came from those other nations. So they were passed down to them. Okay, verse 13 and 14. I saw in the night visions, and behold, one like the Son of Man came with the clouds of heaven. So this almost sounds like the second coming of Jesus, but if you read just a little farther, and came to the Ancient of Days, and they brought him near before him. So we come back to the judgment scene, and first we saw that the Father is sitting on a throne, and then we have the angels gathered around, but we don't see Jesus until this verse. But then Jesus moves to be next to the Father, and he joins the Father. Talks about clouds of heaven, which does represent angels also. So apparently when the angels came, Jesus came with them, but it didn't mention that up above. So they came to the Ancient of Days, and there was a purpose now. We know what that was: to open the books and to make decisions about people. So, what is the result? And there was given him, this is talking about Jesus, dominion and glory and a kingdom, that all people, nations, and languages should serve him. His dominion is an everlasting dominion which shall not pass away, and his kingdom that which shall not be destroyed. So there's the good news. There's some bad news in this chapter, what's going to happen, but it's all going to turn out good. And Jesus, when that judgment finishes, the kingdom is going to be handed to Jesus. And he is going to rule the world from that point on.